Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Doranforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists, and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Welcome back, Curtinistas, men and women, and possibly children of Australia and citizens of the world. Welcome to episode 2 of Curtin's Cast, the new podcast from John Curtin Research Centre and Redbridge Group. My name is Nick Doranforth. I'm the Executive Director of the JCRC, and I'm joined by my very good mate and co-director of Redbridge Group and one of the longest-serving Assistant Secretaries and Campaign Directors in the history of the Victorian Labor Party, Cos Samaras.
All my sins.
How are you, Cosy?
Good, thank you, mate.
Yes, and you survived.
I
You
did.
survived. You're
14 years.
It's cockroach-like behaviour to survive
Oh, yeah.
the swamp.
There were a number of tactical nuclear strikes attempted during that 14-year period.
Well, we're glad you survived and you're here with us on episode 2 of Curtin's Cast. Thank you to everyone who listened to the first episode last week. We were absolutely thrilled and delighted and knocked off our seats to see it enter the top 10 of the Apple Political Podcasts. So give us a like, subscribe on your favourite podcasting service. But today we have got a super impressive, esteemed guest joining us all the way from the UK, London, in fact, North London. That's where my family actually, when they fled Nazi Germany,
Right.
they rocked up to North London. My dad was born in North London, so I consider myself an honorary North London denizen, and members of my family rest there for all eternity. And we're thrilled to be having with us Maurice Glasman. Maurice, if you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, is a Labor life peer in the House of Lords in the UK. He's director of the Common Good Foundation prior to becoming ennobled. Baron Glasman worked for 10 years for London Citizens, community organising on their living wage campaign. He is widely known, perhaps best known, for founding the Blue Labour tendency within UK Labour, which is a conservative form of socialism within Labour, which encourages the return to community values based on trade unions, faith, the church, and voluntary groups. We're going to dig deep with Maurice today on what Blue Labour means. His most recent book is, you'll be shocked to know, it's called Blue Labour, The Politics of the Common Good. And another book which he is very well known for, his first book, which arose out of his doctoral thesis a very, very long time ago, was Unnecessary Suffering, Managing Market Utopia, which made the very revelatory but simple argument that the commodification of human beings, labour and nature is a nightmare. But this is not going to be a nightmare podcast episode. Welcome, Maurice. It's fabulous to have you with us there late at night in the UK.
Yeah, lots of love to Australia, to you. I've got a great love for Australia, really. So I'm happy.
Wonderful. I struggle to call you Lord, Maurice. I really do.
It's difficult, but you can get there, and once you get there, you'll be in a better place. Yeah.
No. I was thinking on the way here, and there was a poem which entered my head. The great Australian poet that ever lived, Henry Lawson. He was writing poems, The Fond de Siècle.
Oh,
late 1890s, 1900s, the greatest poet. He'd be cancelled these days. He was a bit of a radical nationalist and a lefty. He wrote a poem called The Shearers in 1906. And I'll read some of that to you.
Oh, please, can you read it all?
No, because we'll be here. We'll be here the entire podcast episode.
Okay, give me an edited highlight.
He said of the Shearers, they tramp in mateship side by side. You'll like this bit. The Protestant and Roman, they call no biped lord or sire and touch their hat to no man. So we don't call people sir, lord, around here. Well, I'll make an exception for you today. Lord Glasman. So, I know you're not a fan of Vladimir Lenin. You're more of a Marvin Gaye. So what's going on? What's going on, Maurice?
Oh, what's going on is a massive change of era. It's huge and it's quite cosmic in form. And we're not used to it. It's probably, I think, the most significant change since 79, 80. But more significant, I actually go back to this is on a par with the post-war settlement itself. And its features are entirely opposed to the era of globalization. So I call globalization 79 till, you can quibble about it, but I think this election of Trump marks the end of the era of globalization. So let's say 2024, if you want to be nice, 2025, if you really can't accept it. And the difference is sovereignty, end of globalization as an economic system, real interest in industrial production. The underwriters of globalization, China and the United States, are not aligned. This means that we're back to a nation-state system with massive empires, America, China, and to some extent Russia. So globalization, the end of globalization is massively significant. And this is the meaning of Trump, is that the left have failed in my lifetime bid to challenge globalization, and the right, and a really energized radical right, has succeeded. And so the primacy of democracy in that over rights is another aspect. Trump tweeted the other day, a man who saves his country cannot break the law. This is Caesarist.
That guy, because there were like mass brain aneurysms across the Twitterverse and social media when he said that.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the truth. Truth media is telling the truth. This is with intent. This is not a show. It's also very, very democratic in its form. I mean, it really has mobilized a huge coalition to achieve this. It's a coalition fundamentally against progressives. It's an anti-woke. That's a really huge part of the story, is mucking around with gender and saying things that people don't understand. So there's what I noticed in the States was a huge working class support for Trump. And
it cuts across ethnicity, doesn't it? Have a look at the 2024 results because has dived into them.
Yeah, so the Republican Party is no longer, to go back to your poem, the Protestant Party. It's actually really Catholic. And that includes Hispanics and that includes African Americans. So conservative in a really fundamental way. So obviously people like me can get clever and say, the future conflict within MAGA Square is between, Bannon, Vance and the popular Catholic, industrializers and sovereigntists, and people like Musk and Peter Thiel are much more concerned with prosthetic limbs and living till you're 480. And obviously my concern is, how does the Labour interest and obviously the Labour tradition function in this new era? That's just to let you know. How are you, Maurice? Well, I'm thinking about that quite a lot.
Well, isn't it really Trump's a product of, yes, a rejection of elements of the progressive, political system? The left, in my opinion, were and are the beneficiaries of globalization. Those who control the left narrative, the progressives who now permeate through all the sort of political structures.
University educated,
right.
Socially mobile.
That's right.
Cosmopolitans.
Correct.
We call them the ruling class. Yeah.
And Thomas Piketty calls them the Brahmin left. Right?
Yeah.
And fundamentally, and this is where, I think they've not realised that the working class, and it's a very broad term, and I think Nick, you and I discussed that last week. It's not just blue; it's pink. It's all sorts of things.
I want to ask Maurice about. I don't know. Yeah. Maurice and I have known each other for well over a decade now. As hair recedes, Father Time remains undefeated. I think hopefully we're wiser after a decade or so. I want to ask you about what does Blue Labour actually mean? what does this, the return of the working class, Cos has been talking about the return of the working class for a decade or so now. For me, the working class is, I don't want to go down rabbit holes of Marxist definitions, but it's people who work for a living, who've only got their labour to sell for a wage or a salary, and they don't earn a lot of capital. Now, it's more complex than that.
It is, Nick, you've given a good definition. I'm happy with it. People have to leave the house and work with their hands for a wage.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm happy with. So anybody doing an email job, no. No.
They found a way to get them. They found a way to basically have their voices heard again. The power that Trump has, he's made them feel visible again.
Oh, and heard.
That's right.
By the way, Cos, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm hearing it.
Yeah. I mean, this is fundamentally where I think the left progressive forces are completely misunderstanding the Trump phenomenon, even on the weekend when he stood up Zelensky. Now, personally, I thought that was pretty disgraceful, but I'm an elite. I'm part of the elite, right?
No, I think it was pretty disgraceful. I know a lot of people in my country think that was fucking. I think that's it, but we can't understand it. First of all, I got into huge trouble because this week. So, jumping ahead, when I was in Washington, I did a podcast with Steve Bannon, right? I mean, I was the only Labour guy in town.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this later, but you've gone there. You're on the front foot.
Yeah.
I read a piece of Renewal, the journal of social democracy. You've been excommunicated from the left.
Well, I don't think they can do that to me. I just don't think they can. My thing is that the left is joyless. They don't laugh. Everything's misery. And policy and balancing it. No, politics is a really great thing to be involved in, and involves friendship and argument and conversation and that sort of stuff. Because I think Trump is Caesar. I think America is moving from a republic to an imperium. I mean, 730 executive orders in 5 weeks. This has never happened. Never. So I was trying to kind of depict the joyousness, and I said, because I ask you for your forgiveness before you hear this, but I said that progressives are people who don't want you to enjoy having sex with your wife. Okay, so I said I was just trying to convey in some way the length of their misery and it's a violation, it's intrusion, sex is really a violation of autonomy in a fundamental sense, and it's all completely rubbish, and it's horrible, and it's terrible, and it should be stopped. So I just want to ask for forgiveness that I meant it in a humorous way.
But you're not really sorry, are you?
Not in the least, of course.
The youngsters say sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, sorry, not. I like youngsters. I'm with them.
We're young at heart.
So going back to that weekend's event between that we saw out of the Oval Office, personally, sure, my response was similar to everyone else's in the political.
It's just not the right thing to do.
Not the right thing to do. But that's not his audience.
No, exactly, Cost.
That's not his audience.
He gets that.
His audience.
It's in advance.
That's right. His audience are the people that voted for him, who want to see this destabilization of protocols. Normally, you bring around a leader who's, pushing the world to. This is according to a lot of working class people. Yeah, this is another war that we're going to get dragged into. It will be our folk that gets killed. If Americans are conscripted, it's us again, just so people can feel pure and mighty that they're siding with the forces of democracy, whilst our young kids get killed, which is most wars over the last 70 years, right? And so most of these people are sitting at home going, yeah, good on him. He's basically standing this bloke up. And if you look at who's biting the hardest down on that narrative right now, it's these same communities. They are in the US, but they're also here in this country. And they're in, I'm sure, Maurice in the UK.
They're up for draining the swamp. They're up for draining the swamp.
Draining the swamp was 2016 big time. This was really different, Nick. This was resurrectionist. This was make America great again. It was restorative. The armed forces, the integrity of the armed forces, the presidential office, it's hard for us to understand the redemptive power and the commitment that people have to this. It's really something to see.
Something to see, something to hear about is blue Labor, Maurice.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give us the speed dating, truncated version of what is blue Labor? Some people have used the phrase, and I think it's a Sarah Palin, speaking of America, it's a Sarah Palin phrase, actually, faith, family, flag. But in your eyes, in your hands, what is blue Labor?
Okay, so I never said that. John Crudder said that.
This is John.
It was John.
He's never coughed that up to me. So there you go. There's a revelation.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, he needs to redeem. Speaking of redemption, he needs to redeem himself then.
So I would say blue Labour really is a politics that loves and trusts the working class. Really, I don't deviate much from that. After all those years of political philosophy, I just got it down the pub. I'm just faithful to the fact that my country, which is not yours, which is England and Britain, is a magical place. It's a fantastic place that generated genuinely democracy, liberty, and really held them. Very patriotic. I really am a monarchist. I really think that not having politicians as head of state is a fantastic thing, that you can genuinely like the head of state and feel affection to the institutions of the country without that being dependent on the judgment of the prime minister or the president. That comes and goes. So very patriotic, very, very socialist in its economics, believe in a very strong welfare-state partnership in industry. As you mentioned, really strong on trade unions and the renewal. Make trade unions great again would be another way of putting it.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. Restore the dignity of labour and relationality. The meaning of life is found in the people and the people that you love, and being able to honour your obligations to them, which, as you noticed, Nick, over the last, it tend to grow over time, not diminish over time. It's one of the wisdom of the last 10 years is that we've just got to fulfill our obligations to our loved ones and do that try to do that in a meaningful and dignified way. There you go.
That was fantastic, Maurice.
Oh, that's the nice part. We're also sovereigntists.
It's also socialist.
Yeah.
You're proud to call yourself a socialist. That's your political economy. You're not Keynesian. You're not into sort of Viagra economics. Cos is a member of the socialist left here.
Yes.
He's a member of the socialist left faction.
I initially joined it when it actually was focused on economic issues. But that's
I like to joke. You're in a socialist left faction with no socialists, or very few socialists.
Hey. Nick, I don't want to get involved in internal Australian politics. What I'd like to say to Cos is, have you noticed how we used to talk about economics?
Yes.
Don't anymore.
I think you mentioned you made the point about the dignity of labour. That's a thing that I think when you listen to the left globally and also within, here in this country with the Australian Labor Party, how he talks about the work people do, it's no longer interested in ensuring that people feel proud about the work they do.
Yeah.
So people no longer have a strong identity or want to have a strong identity with the work they do, which of course then decouples them from a whole range of things, which of course...
A whole range of things, and work no longer is an object of love, of devotion, of cooperation, which it is, but work is that. That's labour. That's the meaning of labour.
Would you say globalization's been a significant contributing factor to that?
Of course. It's the driving, it was the loss of any confidence, in our political economy and in the dignity of labour. We sold them out. That's just fact.
And they know it. And they know it, Maurice. They know it in England and in Britain and Australia.
When you get chucked by a woman you love or a man you love, you feel it.
Yeah.
Right? You just feel it. That's life. And this was it was a covenantal bond with the working class. And we went for the students. How terrible. Imagine being chucked for a student. It's a humiliation for which you can never really recover. Well, you can only recover by cutting that person right out your life. That's how bad it is.
It's like Air Supply saying, I'm all out of love. Because, you grew up around these people, and I grew up around these people.
Yep.
You grew up around Broadmeadows.
Yes. They're great people. They're just great people. And the best people you ever met in your life were those people.
Yeah, and the foundation of Broadie was car manufacturing.
Textiles.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
And because globalization was seen as inevitable, it was part of the forwards progressive march of history.
I think
these jobs were disposable. I've never accepted that.
Well, I was looking back at some clips of old interviews of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating.
Yeah.
Where they were talking about the importance of globalization, how that was going to enrich the lives of
everybody.
Everyone was going to prosper.
This is what Tony Blair said as well.
And which is absolutely horse dung.
Maurice, so Blue Labor is very much a reaction, a pushback, and I think you would call it an antidote to Blairism and New Labor. Now, I think Blue Labor achieved good things. Ultimately, Blair won 3 elections in a row. You can't take that away from him, but it's a major part of it's not just Blair, though, is it? You're saying that there was a wrong turn, particularly after 1945 for British Labor.
Yeah, that's a long story. There's obviously these are deep stories, and my party is deeply woven into the actual primary matter of the country. This is an astonishing thing they did under incredible conditions of capitalist dispossession and exploitation, the enclosures. Then they built burial societies, they built trade unions, they built a party, and they called it Labour, to defend their dignity and their human status in this world. That's it.
It's not rocket science.
That's the whole story. That's the whole story. And they did it loving liberty, and they did it loving democracy. It's like a miracle of that. And that was the spirit that spread through the Commonwealth. It did. Your party was built by workers. It wasn't a phony, fake thing. It wasn't the Fabians who built Labour. It wasn't the Social Democratic. They destroyed Labour. The working class built Labour to represent their values and their interests and their love of their country. They didn't want to kill the ruling class. They just came to an accommodation.
So we're talking about the New Left here?
No, I'm talking about Labour as it was formed from about 1890 till about 1940.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I have my things to say, because what happened was the war and the alliance with the Soviet Union meant that a particular kind of nationalization model that wasn't really Labour took over. When Labour tried to do it, because it was workers on board, self-management, their locally based partnerships, that all went with the war. So then it became just state nationalisation, command and control from the centre.
The state is important, Maurice, is it? Some people have said you're anti-government, anti-state, but that's not right.
No, I love the state, and the state is the sovereign power that can act. We're living through it right now in my country. What happened over the weekend means that Britain is the leading military power in Europe prepared to intervene, right? And we've said that we're going to put troops on the ground. That's a massive statement of intent. And then you work backwards from that and you realise that we're not producing weapons. So what's the idea here? That we just go shopping? This is an opportunity to reindustrialise for sure. And only the state can move in with the direction and the resources that can facilitate the necessary partnerships necessary to do that.
But what you're on about is you can't just look to the state reflexively.
No.
You're on about this idea of a covenant, not a contract.
Yeah.
The contract is social. We often talk about a contract, a social contract in Australia. It's very, very bureaucratic, abstract language.
Correct. Blue Labour, of course, is covenantal, intergenerational obligations, through time, definitely. And that's what's menaced at this moment. And I totally hold Blair, Brown, New Labour totally devoid of any love of the tradition of the country or of the movement. Desiccated progressive rationalists.
You touch on an important point here, which is working people, whether it's in your country or in this country or in the US, are nationalistic.
Well, okay, I don't want to quibble, across, but I think actually, I think they're patriotic.
Yeah.
I really think there's things that they love about their country.
Yeah, correct.
But our working class have really embraced massive levels of immigration. It's not a narrow nationalism. It's
That's
actually
right.
quite a proud patriotism.
Yep.
I'm just trying to get the right sense.
The right definition that captures that mindset.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that the cultural values that working people have run up against now what is the modern left.
Absolutely correct analysis.
Something that happened with the referendum, which I think the progressive forces in this country completely overlooked why their proposition was rejected. Because halfway through the process, it wasn't just necessarily there was no bipartisan support and so on. These voters that rejected it, halfway through the process, realised whose idea it was. Because initially they thought, okay, that's a fair proposition. That's pretty good. Yeah, I'll vote for that. Which was, we had support numbers for the yes proposition up to 65% at one time. But during that process, there was an enlightenment, and they worked out it was inner urban progressives who wanted this the most, and it was that reason, not just the mistrust of the system and whether this was, not getting enough information. They thought, you guys want it more. So they rejected it. It's just what's going on in the US and other parts of Western democracies.
Totally. I'll tell you a story from the inauguration. It was really telling. It was on Martin Luther King Day, right? The Trump's inauguration. And there was a black preacher from Detroit. And he got up there and he did that Martin Luther King quote, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. And you could hear the cheers, right, from the demos outside at that one. And I turned to the person and I said, what are you cheering? What do you mean you're free at last? And she said, we're free of them telling us what to think, what to do, how to be.
From birth to death.
Absolutely.
From birth to death.
Dispossession, oppression.
Right? Yeah, so this is the mindset of, these groups of people that we're talking about is that they are told what to do from birth to death.
And then now they're being told what to think and what to laugh at and what's funny and not funny by the unfunniest people you've ever met in your life.
Yeah, so fundamentally what you have is a group of people who, when let's say they are married, they have a kid, they are told immediately that they are controlled from when the child is born or when they are born themselves to when they die. Basically, it's this managerial class that basically oversees their existence.
Because what amazes me is these people, they never lack confidence. You look at their lives, it's a ruin. You look at everything around, it's terrible. And yet they still have absolute confidence in telling people how to live, what to do. It's amazing. I'm just sharing my sense of wonder.
So why is it that the left became unpatriotic? Why is it that there's a problem with working people, ordinary people, loving their country, thinking it's the best country in the world?
Okay, Nick, do you really want to go into that?
I do. And I wanted to give you, I've got a little story. I haven't told you this story before, Maurice, about patriotism. So my grandfather-in-law, Ernst, got out of Nazi Germany. Unfortunately, his wife, Herta Louise, may I remember her blessing, was murdered by the Nazis. He got to London. He got to Britain. He served in the army during the war.
Yeah.
Then he came out to Australia. And he broke with Jewish tradition, Maurice, when he was buried, when he passed away. He was buried with, you're going to love this, he was buried with a Union Jack.
Wow.
That's patriotism. You can't, that's it. It's hard to, you want to sort of theorize it, but that's it.
Honestly, it's worthy of his devotion.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's just, lovely story. But why? It's because of the logic. I also took it to cost, so I haven't got on screen. I think it's the abstraction of liberal theory. That they stop being socialist, i.e. relational, partisan, on the side of the working class in the ongoing battles in society, resolute for extending democracy. Because we lost the political economy, because we lost a faith in worker power altogether, they took refuge in a kind of legalistic liberalism in which is abstract. So you had to love everybody. You couldn't be partisan. Everything had to be fair. You couldn't have a pro-worker deal because that would be, wrong. And the people of your country were just a random agglomeration of human beings. They were looking, I think, certainly. I mean, because my big experience talk about referendums was the Brexit referendum.
I was going to turn to that.
Similar. Okay.
And you campaigned for Brexit?
I really campaigned for Brexit. I campaigned hard for Brexit. I campaigned harder for Brexit than anything I've ever campaigned for.
That was part of your excommunication process.
Yeah, but
you became Haram.
For start, we won. But second, because what I witnessed was working class insurrection. It was resolute, it was strong. And they said to me, everywhere I went, everybody that asked questions said, how can we get rid of these people? You can't get rid of these people. We want a system where you can get rid of these people.
It's basically, again, Brexit, like the referendum here in this country, was a rejection based on a certain class of person awakening to the reality that someone else wanted it more than they did. In other words, so the managerial class in the UK were desperate to stay in the EU. In this country, the managerial class, again, were desperate for yes to succeed. I was one of them.
Well, you're reflecting on it, man. You're just reflecting on it. This is where we are. Now it's the new era. Now there's no parachute. Now the rage is real. Now they've got alternatives.
It's rage was also about respect. We're on a musical theme today. We talked about Marvin Gaye. It's also about, Aretha Franklin was summed it up. It's about respect.
Yeah, well, we preferred, because respect was captured in our country in a certain way, we go for this idea of the dignity of labour, dignity of human life, dignity of labour. But it's just that respect became kind of weaponized in the culture wars.
So how do you respond, Maurice? There are critics of Blue Labour. Blue Labour has been around since 2009, 2010, really, took off with the global financial crisis where the emperor of progressivism was exposed, had no clothes. How do you respond to the critique that New Labour is sort of soaked in nostalgia? These ideas, this is me putting the devil's advocate case. The dignity of labour is an outdated concept. You've got to get with it. How do you respond to that? And I like to remind people that nostalgia is not necessarily a bad word. It comes from, actually, because the Australian Greek can correct me here, it comes from the amalgam of two words, nostos, which means homecoming, return, and algos, pain. Now, I think a lot of working class people would like to see Labor return to them.
True.
Nostalgia is just one of those. Enlightenment Marx really took it on to essentially obliterate any affection for history, any inspiration from the past, any notion of tradition. It's quite so really politics, I know what you think, Cos. For me, politics is how do you preserve a sense of a home in the world against capitalism and the state, which tend to just commodify you or bureaucratize you? How do you keep some relational life, that sort of thing? But what I say to them now, Nick, I'm just talking to you a bit like an academic, what I say to them, the progressives and all that, is the future's not what it was, guys. You're outdated modernists. It's the worst thing in the world. They had a teleology, as you said, of frictionless trade and world government and a legal rules-based legal order. There you go, the rules-based legal order that was going to be enforced. the rule, not of law, but the rule of lawyers was their dream. And I don't think workers played, and national sovereignty is the only way that poor people can resist the domination of capital and this progressive ruling class, which works through the state and through law.
That's the paradox of blue labour, isn't it? And a paradox, just to remind listeners, paradox is not a contradiction.
Sounds wrong, but is right.
And so, I mean, on the paradox, left conservatism. Now, let's talk about answers. Again, some of the critique of blue labour is you're very good at diagnosing the problem, diagnosing this loveless marriage or divorce between the left and the working class. But what's the answer? What's your answer to artificial intelligence and the digitization of work? What's your answer to climate change and global warming?
Oh, we're all over. Nick, AI.
Well, by the way, can I just make a quick point about AI?
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of that being, obviously now it's a main talking point on countless podcasts. Every media outlet's talking about it. Lots of people in the left are talking about it as it's a positive thing. Everyone, again, we go back to the people that we're our discussion's focused on, which is working people. AI is just another way to kill their job.
I'm going to answer Nick a bit and talk to you simultaneously. So I'm completely into AI. I'm really getting into it because I think it is going to be a vital thing, and it's going to have an enormous destructive and potentially emancipatory aspect. So we've got to hold the two. And that's because any socialist politics has got to socialize in some way these technological changes and change the interest. That's the importance of the sovereignty. So, Nick, I've really got into John Ruskin and William Morris, and they were like in a conversation about arts and crafts and the machine. Then Frank Lloyd Wright got involved in it, and basically they were really struggling to find a way that humanity could be preserved in the age of the machine, right? And we did it through trade unionism.
Yes, we've done it, but we've been here before.
Yeah, so we've got to. So this could really resolve a lot of issues in relation to the state, because if the admin email jobs could be done on 5 seconds with a greater statistical chance of being correct information. So that's about diagnosis, that's about inquiry. Huge lawyers can, guys. So what I'm saying, because AI could do to the bourgeoisie what globalization did to the working class, in which case it's an ally. We could say,
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, in terms of where it's going to impact the most, yes, it will be white collar occupations, professional occupations that will get impacted the most by the AI revolution. But again, there's no doubt about that.
There's this need in the left and progressive circles that we have to reinvent the wheel constantly. But the basic starting point is Maurice has said this before. Life is about the people and the places that you love. I want to talk about climate change in a minute and the environment, but
that's a lot to go.
Just quickly, before we move on from this subject of AI and who it impacts the most, let's not forget that there are many people that I would define as working class who, work in lower level admin, lower level parts of the bureaucracy, who are earning not much money.
No, I get that.
And they are the ones who are going to get absolute smacked by this.
Okay, so what we've got to be way ahead is opening up the space that people can move into that is meaningful. That's not a shit lower level admin job. There's going to be a massive explosion, for example, of relational care, genuine. So AI can liberate people from behind the desk and actually put them into relationship with people, see how they are, how they're doing, these things. And then there's got to be a reindustrialization. That's got to be part of it. And a real honouring of of these manual skills. I think the new era is going to be very in favour of that. And so we've got to look, what I'm saying, it's just strange. So in the sense, Nick, that they meant it, I was never nostalgic. They think nostalgia means I wanted to recreate 1953 or so. What I wanted was to honour the tradition and live it of labour, of the dignity of labour, of your obligations to other people, of the joy that comes from common endeavour, all that. I want it back. And I think AI could liberate the time for people to get back to a sense of having time for each other. In the workplace, I'm talking about, it's the end of home working.
Blue Labour's big on place.
Yeah,
People being
big.
rooted in place. And so talk to me about what the progressives, the left, called climate change. Used to be called global warming before the Republican pollster Frank Luntz. He was able to change up the language until his house burnt down in California in wildfires.
That's what happens with climate change,
but you don't use the word climate change a bit. So how does Blue Labor conceptualise this? I mean, from my point of view, there's actually a way of talking to people who aren't interested in abstract language around net zero. I think when a lot of working people hear the word net zero, they think coming for our jobs. But again, in the environment, if we come back to basics, Cos is an atheist. We won't hold that against him here. But a lot of people are religiously minded. There's one way of framing it, Maurice. You might like this. Do you know what God did? God created man and woman in his own image, and he created the heavens and the earth. He did not create us and nature to be commodified. That's it.
Well, I spoke, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's the ARC conference.
We have heard of that, yes.
So they invited me, but they only invited me to speak for 2 minutes, Cos. So I was, I could have taken that as a disrespect. I decided to take it as an opportunity. So I said to them, how many of you believe that God created the world? And they all went, yeah. Right? It was a really strong, about 5,000 people there. It was a big yeah. And I said, how many of you think you made a design error and should have privatized it first? Right? And there you got the cognitive dissonance of the right. Because they can't. We've got to come up with really strong ways of domesticating capital and technology. How do you subordinate it to people's interests? And that's the socialist aspect, by the way, Nick, of Blue Labour, is that we're really into that thing. So we're claiming John Ruskin, Frank Lloyd Wright, William Morris, and AI. We're saying, let's take a arts and crafts approach.
We spoke about draining the swamp earlier. I think the right talks a big game about draining the swamp. I don't think they're really interested in taking up the fight to, economic elites, the winners of globalization. They love complaining about drag queens reading to children at libraries, etc. But
it depends who you refer to as elites.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we have seen the emergence now of super oligarchs globally, and they are the ones who are benefiting directly from Trump's administration.
Okay.
So really what's going on is complete, I would say, handover of a lot of power to people who've got already a lot of built up power as a result of their technological revolution. I like Varoufakis' interpretation of them, the techno-feudalists.
I mean, but that's the battle. That's the battle, Cos, right? So, there is a complete conflict between the demos and the elite. I mean, Musk and Thiel, they've got a really different conception to Bannon and Vance about trade unions, stable life, industrialization. This is perfect space for Labour, just the Labour tradition, Labour Party to move into that space and say, yeah, globalization shit, capitalism as pathologies, we've got to preserve human life and pull together and make things and do things for each other, which is the meaning of society. I really think the space is open. That's the grief of the moment, if you like. It's, we can't seem to move into the space that's just opening up.
And there is a big opportunity, even on national security issues. The Australian right and the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, a lot of chest thumping about national security, the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. But Morris used the term cognitive dissonance. It is there because what did the coalition, the Liberal Party, this is our so-called conservatives, Morris, what did they do the last time they were in office in 2019? They privatised the most strategically important port in Australia. This is the top north of Australia.
Port Darwin.
Darwin.
Mm.
They privatised it. Who did they lease it out to? Chinese Communist Party, a state-owned company. I mean, what are we doing leasing out any single port in Australia, let alone Darwin, which hosts US troops, Darwin International
I
Airport?
guess you can always rescind it.
Well, it should be.
Well, you can.
It should be rescinded.
Yeah. I mean, they'll take the money at the moment, but then they'll just rescind it if a conflict gets out of hand.
Can you believe that, Morris? We privatised our port.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I believe it with all my heart. But this is the reality. Look, because I think that the internal contradictions of progressivism destroyed it. You know, they couldn't cope with their dissonance. They lost the base. They couldn't articulate any meaningful vision of a better society other than more of the same, more of the same. And then Trump's come along and he said that you were so right when you said, I witnessed it in DC. He talks directly like Caesar to his people. I mean, they're in the square. And I was at the rally where he signed the executive orders. It was an extraordinary thing to witness. He stood up and he said, there are only two genders, male and female. And the people went, yeah. And then he said, we are no longer part of the World Health Organization, which is a corrupt Chinese-dominated institution. Yeah. And we're out of the Paris Agreement. I was sitting there watching globalization hacked to death. And it was greeted with rapture. Right? And I just thought, why can't we do that?
Well, I mean, he's tapping into, obviously, a phenomenon that we've been discussing throughout this entire podcast, and that is that working people are no longer prepared to absorb the burden of globalization, and they will change that via the ballot box. And the right have been very successful, the populist right have been very successful in tapping into that mindset. And I think the left have been reluctant to acknowledge it's been a problem because they've been the beneficiaries of it.
But you said the right word, Ross. You said populist. And that's the point. The left, what do we mean when we say populist? I think it means anti-globalizing and pro-democracy, basically.
Well, populist means you're going to win a few ballots too, right?
Yeah. But they want
I mean, the numbers go.
They want accountability from their politicians, you know, in this. And they're looking for a democratic party that opposes globalization.
That's right.
What drives me nuts is that should be us.
That's right.
You flipping fools. We hated Thatcher. We hated Reagan. We despised the system of capitalist dominion over all states. And now we are its underwriters.
Because the left has become, in the worst sense of this word, conservative.
Of course.
When the Labor parties were set up, anti-elite, we were insurgents. We were seized with a zeal to change the world, but also to conserve the really good things about Australia and England and Britain.
Do you think? I think they've become reactionary. I think they're reactionary.
The energy is with the right. To paraphrase another sort of intellectual inspiration to the both of us, the godfather of social democracy, Edward Bernstein, or democratic socialism, the movement is everything, and you know, movement is everything for this Trumpian right. They've got the energy, they've got the zeal.
Totally, everything. The scale of this, I'll be going with this, and sorry, Cos, to repeat, but the scale of the change and of working class affections is very, very significant indeed. I mean, if America's going to become an imperium, you know, globalization is ended, nation-state competition is restored. Very big stress. I can't stress it enough on industrialization in the Trump element. That includes both Bannon, Vance, Musk, Thiel. industrialization is key. Control of the precious metals, as we saw, particularly graphite and titanium, which are necessary for contemporary modern industrial production. Well, it used to be the industry. Well, what did we do? It was exclusively exported to China. The whole meaning of Thatcher Blair is the empowerment of the Chinese Communist Party. And that's a very big one for Australia to eat.
Yeah, the irony is we enriched the so-called number one enemy of our Western democracies.
Our number one enemy was absolutely empowered
by us.
Darwin. Look, evolution, they defy evolution. They can only go backwards. They're the opposite of a kangaroo. They can only go backwards.
Speaking of kangaroos, Maurice, we've caught you in a very good mood, and we do need to wrap things up. I think you're in a particularly good mood because it wasn't possible for Tottenham Hotspurs to lose over the weekend.
But my love of my football team can only be equaled by, your father's love of the Union Jack. Okay,
grandfather-in-laws.
Through good times and bad, the faith endures. Oh, and thank you, Australia. Thank you, all Australia, for Ange. I am devoted to him. I think his vision of football is immaculate. I think his conception of how the game should be played is absolutely correct. I'm devoted to his well-being and his continued rule at my club.
Bless you, Maurice. Ange is a Melbourne boy.
Yes, he is.
And also, he was a player and coach at my local football team, South Melbourne Hellas.
South Melbourne Hellas, yep.
We're going to get cancelled for calling them Hellas. You're not allowed to call them you're not allowed to call these teams by their names anymore.
Call them Hellas.
They're now called the Lakers.
Hellenic.
The Lakers.
Hellenic.
So you both are in the tradition of Ange.
You'll love this too. So South Melbourne Hellas, of course, was a merger between two ethnic teams. Obviously, the Greeks.
Yeah.
And do you know the other team?
No, I do not.
Melbourne Hakoah.
Oh, no.
Really? Yes.
Really?
There you go.
It's the great Greek-Jewish alliance, Cos. We're living it out here.
Because that Hakoah was the great Viennese Jewish team.
Yeah.
That was really, really good, Cos, in the 20s. They won the Austrian League. In the 20s. So what we've got, Cos, on our hands here is this great coalition between Jews and Greeks for the glory of the world. I think this is where we are.
This is what you call it's the reconciliation of estranged interests.
And Cos, never step back from that relationship. We've got to make it stronger.
Absolutely.
We do. Maurice, Lord Glasman, it has been an absolute pleasure. We can't wait to talk. I could have spoken to you for hours and days.
Absolute pleasure. Love to you, Nick. Cos, really good to meet you, Cos. Really a pleasure for me. And Glory, love the working class and do right by them, and all in your life will be well.
Glory to the working class. Slava Ukraina. Wonderful to have Maurice on the show. We are out of time, so thank you, Curtin listeners. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll be back in a week's time with another sensational guests. Ciao. Arrivederci.